Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of InRange. We're doing part two today with Nathan from Faxon. We had such a great return on our investment on that first Q&A in regards to barrels and nitriding processes, and people really seem to like this deep dive stuff. And so we've got some more questions about barrels and stuff that hopefully, Nathan, you can help us out with. And we're also going to cool. And we're also going to do a little bit more conversation about nitriding because I did some research on my own. But let's go ahead and just start with the barrel stuff first because we got questions that are not about nitride. They're more about just other stuff. People have a lot of interest in this, and there's also a lot of personal opinion involved in some of this as well. So whatever happens with ARs and modern guns, it's always controversial. So let's see what we can clear up today. One of the things that people always ask about is barrel profiles. So, for example, barrel profile is not just the length, that's another discussion, but generally how the barrel's cut, right? So we have HBARs, which are like heavy barrels. We have pencil barrels. We have M4 cuts. We have all this stuff. And Nathan, maybe you can clarify what the normal barrel profiles are and what you've seen with your experience being a barrel manufacturer as to why they exist and what the benefits and detriments are of each.
Yeah, be very happy to. So let's step back for a second. The reason for the barrel profile to exist from a technical standpoint as you look at it really boils down to two things that you're worried about. One is the base rigidity of the barrel itself. As you know, you can take aluminum foil and you can bend it really easily, but if you take even an eighth of an inch of aluminum, you can't bend it. It's too difficult to do so. So you have the same effect with a barrel piece of steel in that the thicker the barrel is, the more rigid it is. Now, in terms of its practical application to accuracy, once you get past a certain point, which really that certain point is even pencils, on a cold bore, the basic barrel profile doesn't necessarily matter too much. Now, the second component is the amount of material which allows you to control and account for the heat that is going to be put in the system. For example, plastics are a great example that we can touch and feel on a daily basis. Something that's really cold or room temperature is rigid. You can't move it. But as you get hotter, it becomes more and more loose. And you have the same thing with steel. Now, not something that we would ever notice in human beings trying to bend it, but you do see it in terms of the practical accuracy of a barrel when it shoots down range and you go, oh, wow, my barrel got hot and my group opened up. It's exactly the same thing.
Okay, so let me, one real-world example of this, although not everybody has experience with this, is the SVD, the Dragunov. It has a relatively thin barrel. I wouldn't call it a pencil, but it's not an HBAR kind of thing. And so as you shoot an SVD and it gets hot, you tend to start seeing not only the group open up, but you see vertical stringing because the barrel's rigidity isn't quite there enough to keep that elevation different. And so you can't see it with your eye, but the barrel tends to flex upward under heat, and you start seeing your group moving upwards on the target.
Yep. There's a couple things that go into the effect downrange. We talked a little bit in the last episode about the importance of stress relief and how button versus cold hammer forged versus cut and broach and everything. And certain SVD barrels are stress relieved, others are not. And so when it gets warm, it becomes more pliant and the stress is going to start pushing it. But you also have, going into the primary rigidity of the barrel, the base design of the AK in terms of where it puts pressure from a physical standard on the barrel. Because it's a piston system far up on the barrel, it's going to put pressure on the barrel when it fires, and that is going to cause some of the stringing that people see out there because the gas system's lined up vertically on top of the barrel.
Okay, but we still haven't gotten necessarily to the nuts and bolts about HBAR versus pencil versus like an M4 profile cut. So, for example, the original M16 was a pencil barrel, right? And then the M16A1 was essentially a pencil barrel. And then we saw when the M16A2 happened, the Marines specifically changed that. I believe it was the Marines, changed it to like an HBAR profile, which was a much thicker barrel profile. And some of the things that happened on the M16A2, the rear sight adjustment, the ability to do elevation and windage was a certain amount of clicks, half-minute clicks, as well as the barrel thickness was to a large degree, as I understand it, especially being a high-power shooter, was actually for the KD range. It was to give them more precision over a sustained rate of fire, as well as when you were to sling up on a sling. When you put a sling on for artificial support, you apply a lot of pressure to that barrel or that sling mount point. And if it's not free-floated with a pencil barrel, you'll actually bend the barrel to the left or the right, depending on if you're left or right-handed. And with an H-bar, it kind of diminished that dramatically.
That was definitely part of it. Fortunately, the design of the M16 is the front sight base is mounted directly to the barrel. So even if you are bending the barrel, you're also bending the placement of the front sight post relative to the rear aperture. So you don't notice it as much with a non-free floated M16 system. But say you, of course, we're going off in the weeds. Didn't take us long, did it?
No, it would not. Yeah.
So if you put that pressure directly on the barrel, and it's easy to do. Most guys who have free float rail systems, you can grab the barrel on the front of it and you can squeeze and you can move it. You'll watch the barrel physically move relative to the rail. If you did that and your front sight wasn't mounted to the barrel, that's going to be a really bad day. You're going to be significantly off at range.
So for a person that today was building, let's say, their first AR, let's say they're going to go down that path, or they're buying an AR, an upper for their purposes, why would they pick an HBAR or a pencil or something else in between? What are the general reasons for that?
It's a good question. So I would state back to the customers, what is your intended purpose of the build? If you say general purpose AR-15, I'm going to default to the lightest barrel profile that you feel comfortable with. And you've got different schools of thought in terms of how really thin barrels perform out there in the field. And again, I'll put this disclaimer to everybody who's listening and watching. Faxon makes the lightest pencil barrels out there. So go out, do other research, verify what I'm saying as part of the answers here. But what the personal opinion and our professional opinion is that thin barrels are vastly underrated in terms of their capability of performance, because it's going to do everything that you ask of it on cold bore if you're just doing, say, hunting. And if you're doing magazine dumps, you're probably not too terribly concerned with precision accuracy at that point. But it even goes into the design of barrels and the modern manufacturing of that. As modern manufactured barrels, all right, let me step back for a second. When pencil barrels first came out onto the civilian market, people utterly disliked them. And the reason is they strung like a son of a gun. And that goes back to the stress relief. The barrels were not stress relief because it was cheap manufacturing, etc. So you'd shoot at 10 rounds and all of a sudden your group is walking. Well, that's not the case anymore, especially when you have free-floated barrel systems. So going into kind of, we talk about the barrel profile itself. What the thickness of the rigidity is going to do is that's going to affect your base accuracy. But again, on a cold bore, most people aren't accurate enough shooters to be able to tell the difference between the performance of a pencil and a heavy fluted or even just a big fat heavy barrel. Sorry to say, shooters, most people aren't that good. Bench rest guys can do that.
So to clarify, the thicker the barrel, the longer the course of fire, or the more rounds you can fire before you see a deviation in your group size or point of impact, point of aim.
That's exactly it, yes. So in our case, what we've always said is that the base barrel will go to about 2 times the base accuracy when it gets hot. And that's going to depend on how quickly are you firing, what ammunition are you firing, and the thickness of the barrel itself. So in the case of a pencil barrel, let's say it's a minute of angle with match ammunition, the normal asterisks, stars, and caveats that come along with that. And you shoot it till it gets warm. It should roughly double in size from its base grouping, and it will stay there all the way through the extreme duress, which a shooter at home can't get there because we're not shooting fully automatic, which is what has to happen to get up to those extreme temperatures. Even a spirited 3-gun shooter or Jerry Michalak isn't going to get it hot enough that you're going to start seeing significant deviations in that or the group spread as it goes downrange.
I would say that I think it makes a lot of sense that the military application of a barrel profile and the civilian application of a barrel profile are different. So in that the military may want something that's a heavier barrel because they have the situation that they may run into in which guys are doing multiple full auto mag dumps, and a thicker barrel is less likely to have a problem and or rupture. Fair statement?
Yes.
Okay.
That is an absolutely fair statement.
So a pencil barrel in a military application would be more likely to fail sooner with mag dumps than an HBAR.
Yeah, and not just more likely, it absolutely will fail sooner because that surface area of the outside of the barrel, and I know we're going to talk about fluting here in a little bit, and this will go into it. The outside surface area is going to determine how much area is exhausting heat into the air. So a thinner barrel has a smaller profile, but it also has less metal to serve as a heat sink. So it's going to heat up faster, and it's not going to be able to exhaust it as quickly because of its smaller surface area. So yes, for a civilian shooter, it doesn't make sense. And a classic example, this is when we went from the M4 the standard M4 barrel to the M4A1. And that's when the Army went and said, oh, okay, I'm going to be doing full auto instead of 3-round burst, because 3-round burst didn't make sense. The school of thought on I need to conserve ammunition on full auto, it's largely moved back to the school of thought that full auto is better for the myriad of reasons outside this conversation. But they absolutely found that barrels were having reduced life and were rupturing simply because of the profile and the ammunition and the duty cycle that they were being put through.
So I can tell you this comes from competition experience, because I've shot high power and I've shot across the course and I've done 1,000-yard, and I also do a lot of 3-gun, 2-gun stuff. And my high power rifle, that gun is not practical at all. It's got a gigantic HBAR profile stainless steel barrel on it with weights that bring the gun up to, no joke, 18 pounds. My competition high-power gun is an 18-pound M16A2 derivative semi-auto with a stainless steel H-bar, and the reason for that is it diminishes the recoil, allows you to have controllability in the rapid-fire strings, which, by the way, is 10 rounds over a minute, and it allows you to have no deviation on your point of impact, point of aim, with your zero at 600, 800,000 yards. But that is a very specific application for a specific profile for a specific reason. When it comes to 2-gun, 3-gun, a pencil barrel, in fact, my Colt SP1 that goes back to the early 80s, I've shot, in a stage I'll shoot 60 rounds max. I mean, that's a heavy round count stage, and it makes no difference in practical accuracy for the targets we engage in that environment. So that's exactly coming back to what you were saying. So one thing that confuses me is that when I see people buying, for example, an M4 profile barrel, which tends to be thinner under the handguards, and it gets thicker near the front sight for the front sight A-frame to mount, but it's also intended mostly for you to be able to mount an M203 grenade launcher, which, why would you put that except for appearance on a civilian gun?
You wouldn't if you were following the practical laws of physics in terms of a barrel. It's fascinating for, I think, any viewer to go out and look at the history of the change from the M16A1 to the M16A2 and why they put, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, a fat cantilever weight on the front of a gun. And urban legend is that it was Marines, which Semper Fi brothers. We were going out there and we were bending the barrel when we were using the bayonet or trying to use the rifle as a tool. And so what they found is it was bending directly in front of the gas block, the thinnest portion of the barrel. All right, makes sense, right? Rigidity, thinnest portion. So what the brainiacs thought is, okay, they're bending it right there, so let's make it fatter right there. And what they ended up finding after they already made the change is now the bending went behind the gas block, and it was still persistent from guys trying to use it as a tool. So it really didn't do anything, but at the point in time you had the barrel pattern set as a government specification, it really wasn't going to be changing here anytime soon. Yeah. So in the case of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so really, if you think about it, if you've got a barrel that's this long, however that long is, and it's thin here and thick here, you have essentially, it's like the weakest link of a chain. You have made the rigidity of that barrel whatever the smallest portion is, which is here. Even if this is thicker, you're still losing it here. It doesn't matter anymore.
And that's exactly it. So I've got a good barrel that would serve as an example here. We call this our gunner profile. It's a hybrid that exists out there. I've also got one of our SOCOMs floating around, which is the government profile. But since what we're always talking about is rigidity, what everyone sees when you start talking about barrels, especially in slow motion, is whip. The deviation of the bore from its base position during the firing sequence because of all the pressure that's going through this large pressure vessel. So all things being equal, the less deflection of the muzzle due to the rigidity of the barrel, the more accurate it's going to be, meaning the bullet or the bore is going to be pointing directly at the point of aim when you pull the trigger. So what you want when you look at a barrel is you want it fat at the rear and skinny up front, assuming you want to reduce the weight of the barrel. Because the more rigid it is back here, the less it's going to deflect at the end of the barrel. Following me so far?
That makes sense. If it was like if you had a bar or a barrel and you were trying to bend it, if it's thicker at the rear, which would be the point of leverage. If it's thick here but thin here and you try to bend it, it would be harder. If it was thin here and thick here, it would bend at the rear, just like we discussed with that profile a moment ago.
Yep, that's exactly it. So in terms of the ideal barrel profile is you want something that's going to taper. Part of that is accuracy reasons of a cone shape versus having a straight cylinder. But you want it to taper from the rear to the front. So the M16A2 is a gross abomination in terms of that line of thinking. So this what allows you, and you get into a couple other things. The barrel is hottest here about 3 inches in front of the chamber. That's where you have the primary and most of the combustion of the round accelerating the bullet down the bore. So you want the most material right here where it's going to be hottest, so you are the most rigid. And then the rest of this tube is primarily serving as acceleration, not accuracy. Now you want to balance, the weight of the barrel itself to the intended accuracy, but you're able to get away with removing a lot more material without sacrificing it.
Well, since you're going down that path, it sounds like this is a great opportunity to start talking about fluting, because isn't fluting where this helps?
It can. So like we talked about, the outside diameter of the barrel is what's going to determine the rigidity of the barrel itself. All things being equal, independent of the type of material. Where fluting is going to help out is really in 2 ways, and most people understand that. Is it's going to help you reduce the weight of the barrel, and it's going to help you increase the surface area to allow it to cool.
So it's like fins on a heatsink or fins on a radiator. When you make more surface area and you have something that gets hot, the more surface area and the more airflow, the quicker it will cool. And therefore, fluting can help keep a hot barrel or cool a hot barrel faster.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. So here I've got a fluted barrel here in front of me. So when you flute it, everyone's going, I'm sure some people are sitting here thinking, you always talked about the OD of the barrel as what's going to determine its rigidity. Absolutely the case. And when you flute it, are you not reducing from the outer diameter of the barrel? You absolutely are. Now, from a practical standpoint, you still have the actual round OD of the barrel itself and you're cutting into it. So there's a complex equation that goes into the actual effective reduction of the OD. But what you're basically looking at is that the added benefits of fluting outweigh the reduction in rigidity compared to the base outer diameter. But that's why I'm sure on your CMP gun, it's not fluted. My guess is you are a completely round tube on your
That's correct.
barrel, correct?
Uh-huh,
right.
Yes.
Because you're wanting absolute precision. Mm-hmm. Somebody who's going to a fluted barrel is wanting to balance that precision with the practical of, I got to carry this thing around humping through the woods for 18 hours or the next 7 days. I don't want something that heavy, but I do want to make sure that my bullet's going to go where I tell it to when I release my shot during a hunt.
So now this is a legitimate question on my part because I don't know the answer to this. When you say you've increased the surface area on a fluted barrel, which means it will cool faster, but you have reduced rigidity to some degree. So if you were to take a barrel of similar thickness, like the one you have now, but take another one that's exactly the same without fluting, and were to dump full auto through that as fast as you could, would the fluted barrel fail sooner?
Yes, it will, because you do have a smaller cross-section of material by the bore where it's going to get hottest. And the actual rupture of a barrel is going to be when the steel has gotten so hot that it starts annealing and it just cannot contain the pressure anymore. A classic example of that, and a lot of people have always asked questions, and I saw a couple of the commenters ask about Iraq vets, meltdown video of a Faxon barrel. All right, there's a couple things to go into that. One, it was a stainless steel barrel. Stainless does not take heat anywhere near as well as a standard carbon steel barrel. That's why carbon steel you always see being used in military guns, because it can take more heat. The second piece is we start talking about it was a government profile. It was skinny here behind the gas block and it was fat up front. Well, on the original government profile, especially those on an M4 carbine, well, conveniently, the hottest portion of the barrel is also on a carbine length gas system. This one's mid, but it's 2 inches back. Well, guess what? Your hottest portion of the barrel is at the skinniest portion of the barrel. Of course it's going to fail. So, yes, you will fail sooner than a non-fluted barrel, but again, you're going to pick up significant ability for heat sink. You pick up significant material, but it will fail sooner, yes.
It sounds to me like from a civilian perspective, or actually even from a government perspective, from a military perspective, the government profile barrel is the worst of both worlds. For an M4, yes. For an M16, A1, and even the A2, it's annoying that you have the weight out in the end, but it's not terrible because you still have significant material at the hottest portion of the barrel. On the M4 version of that, there really would be no reason as a civilian to use that profile unless you strictly want it for aesthetic reasons.
In a carbine length gas system, I completely agree. Mid, again, a little bit different because you are extending that out a hair.
Sure, so. Fair enough. And I know I'm making comments that are I don't mean to sound so absolute. Maybe I shouldn't be that absolute because there's no absolutes in the world. But in general, I would be dubious of a M4 profile barrel on a civilian semi-auto gun, except for aesthetics.
I would agree with that statement, and that's why you don't see Faxon making that profile anymore. We've moved on to trying to push the boundaries of what people consider acceptable and trying to show that the technology is already there to perform better.
And from what I've also heard and what you've said right now is that pencil barrels back then were fine, but pencil barrels now are even better because the manufacturing capabilities and the ability to stress relieve a pencil barrel compared to then to now is different. And if you stress relieve one properly, you can get a lot of performance out of a pencil barrel, maybe even in some, not sustained, but some full auto application as well.
Yeah, absolutely. For reference, people are like, oh my God, it's really small. I've taken 60 proof rounds through one of our pencil barrels and ripped it off for the sake of the experiment, and the barrel holds up just fine. It's incredible what they can actually do.
A couple of years back when we visited Jim Sullivan, he was talking about this, and one of the things he was trying to do was increase the capabilities, fire supremacy capabilities of the M16 platform. And he was doing things a little differently because he had different goals in mind, right? He's designing completely a military gun. But one of the things that was interesting in terms of failure, and we saw this on video, and I don't know if we can put it on this or not, is that the actual gas tube would start twisting like a tail, and when the gas tube, seriously, the gas tube starts bending and doing weird stuff, and when the gas tube touched the barrel, that's when that barrel let go, because you had the combined heat of the gas tube and the barrel touching, and that spot right there, blammo, it was done. And so he was radiating gas tubes, in fact, to make the gas tube cool faster as well.
Yep. And that's definitely a part of the design of the M16. You know, that gas tube, when you go back to, and you've had the pleasure of talking to Mr. Sullivan, it was designed to blow before the barrel. It was a safety device in addition to being the primary operating mechanism. Because you can replace a gas tube or you can fire with a single shot rifle, but it's a catastrophic detonation. If the barrel goes, that could also damage you as the soldier or the shooter. That's a bad day. Sure,
absolutely. So, all right. We've done a lot there. Let's go to barrel lengths. This one should be a little quicker. So what, in general, barrel lengths and why? So, I mean, in my experience from a precision shooting perspective, a very short barrel can be very precise and very accurate. Now, you lose velocity, but barrel length does not necessarily determine accuracy unless it also is a component in your sight radius. So if you're using an optically sighted rifle, a 10-inch barrel can be just as accurate as a 20-inch barrel.
Well, you covered it all.
Oh, okay. No, but so why would you pick these as a person? What's the? I mean, like for example, I'll throw one more out there and then you go. Yeah. But like the 14.5-inch barrel length, I've come to find, and this is really surprising, where they came to with that, as I understand it, is there were 10-inch barrels with the the 10.5 with the GAU and some of the early carbines, and they had these sound dampeners on there because they were so loud they would just rupture your eardrums to fire it. And 14.5-inch actually turned out to be the length in which the gun didn't hurt your ears so badly when you fired it, and that's literally where they got to that number. It wasn't scientific.
Yeah, fantastic piece for somebody to go research on that. But to answer your question, all things being equal, a shorter barrel is going to be more accurate than a longer barrel. Oh, I know. I said it.
Because it's more rigid, right? It's more rigid. There's less flex.
That's exactly it. The longer the piece of steel, the more weight that is hanging off of your pivot point, which is typically on a free-floated barrel right back at your chamber. So the longer this gets, the more force is being put on this point, causing the barrel to droop. And it's the more weight that this portion of the steel has to support during the firing process. That said, you can make long barrels very, very, very accurate. Look at 338 Lapua barrels at 28 and 32 inches. You absolutely can. So then it becomes, the battle of how much weight do I want to put in it and how much rigidity do I want to put in it versus the velocity that I'm going to gain out of the distance. So it's really interesting when you start talking about why would you choose a set length barrel. What I've always told people is choose the shortest barrel for your given application. One, you're going to appreciate not having the extra piece that you could bang into something when you're trying to carry the rifle. Two, you don't have the weight and everything else that goes along with that. But 5.56 is especially sensitive to, or anything that's small bore, high velocity cartridge is going to be very sensitive to the length of the barrel. So 5.56, as we know, was designed to use a 20-inch barrel. Its powder capacity, its case capacity was designed to fully combust in a 20-inch barrel. And every time we start chopping it off, you're going to reduce the effectiveness of the base cartridge. Now, we all believe and we know 14.5 and 16 is perfectly comfortable and competent as a cartridge, but you do reduce the effective range of it from a military standpoint. Trade-off to 5.56 is you have more unburnt powder, so it's even louder. And even the difference between a 14.5 and a 16 is incredible to the human ear based off of the amount of unburnt powder that's still left in the bore.
Yep, and that's overbore, essentially powder exploding when it leaves the barrel, or still burning, I should say. So it's interesting. So, you go back into the Old West, and really long barrels were the deal because black powder needed that to get the velocity. 5.56 and 5.45 to that as well are velocity-dependent rounds. So you need so what you're doing is by lengthening the barrel, you're buying velocity, and by buying velocity, you're buying ballistic capabilities at greater distances. Right?
Yes.
So by shortening the barrel to a 14.5 with standard 5.56, and I'm talking 55 grain, 62 grain, you're ballistically capable. I mean, you can hit stuff, but you're ballistically viable out to 300-400 yards, maybe 5 if you're really pushing it. But with a 20-inch, you can go much further than that. And if you change the cartridge to like a 77 or 75, you're changing that game entirely again.
Right.
Okay, a 7.62 by 39 10-inch barrel gives up less than a 10-inch 5.56 gun does.
Yeah, and that's when you start getting into the design of cartridges, it's another phenomenal conversation. But you have a 5.56 only has a certain amount of surface area that you can impart force into the projectile as it travels down the barrel. The larger the diameter of the bullet, the more force that you can put upon it easier compared to the smaller diameter cartridge. That's why 300 blackouts, you start having a law of diminishing returns after 10 inches for that particular cartridge. So you're able to get more power into it in a shorter distance by using a larger diameter round.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't even think about that, but that's completely logical. So the smaller surface area of the caliber of the round you're firing means that there's more pressure behind it to get it down the barrel. If you have more surface area, you're inducing less pressure down the barrel, and so the PSI changes when you go to smaller, higher velocity cartridges.
Yep, that's exactly it. That's why 300 blackout is a shorter length gas system, is because the pressure that exists behind the round is less than the comparable 5.56. That's why you always see a carbine length 16-inch 300 blackout versus, say, a rifle length on an 18-inch for a 5.56, is because that operating pressure inside the pressure containment vessel, the barrel, is too low to operate the mechanism, or is it the right place to operate the mechanism?
So the right answer on barrel length, as I think I'm repeating you here, is you get the shortest barrel you can legally use, legal is part of this, of course, that you can legally use dependent on the goals you have for that gun. So if you want to be shooting 5.56 out to 800 yards, you probably want a 20-inch barrel, right? Or longer even.
We go into, and as you know from the CMP and the high power world, you want to make sure that your bullet is staying supersonic to the given range that you're wanting to shoot. So that's really kind of the big caveat, is where are you going subsonic, meaning where is your bullet going to start tumbling through the air and you lose the base stabilization of the round.
Well, which is true, and actually that was something we worried about at the 600 or 800 yard line, 600 yard line even as well. So for example, you with a short barrel, you may go, or 308 as well at 1,000 yards, right? I found 175 to say supersonic to about 1,200, and certain 168 grain loads would actually go subsonic around 900 yards, and when you go subsonic, your zero kind of goes to hell because things get weird.
Yep, and the actual effect is going through the transonic barrier, if you've ever heard that term before. That's when you're going from being supersonic on the round to being subsonic. And when the bullet goes through that transition, a lot of turbulence is put on the round itself. That's what causes the destabilization of the round. And it will either, restabilize, but at this point, mind you, it's been wobbling all over the place in terms of the air. So it may restabilize, but it's not going on the exact same azimuth that it was on when it was traveling downrange. So that's why you see now 308s and other guys wanting to really put heavy twists on barrels, is because it imparts more stabilization into the bullet, so it's more resistant when it goes transonic at those ranges.
Yep. Cool. Awesome. And you know what? It's obvious we can have a lot of these conversations because all this stuff could be entire videos, right? Essentially. So let's go ahead, and this is going to be another half-hour one. Let's finish up with a little bit further follow-up on nitriding process, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. So
sure.
The last video we did was on nitride, and that was, of course, nitride versus chrome lining, and that's another video. If you haven't seen that, guys, go watch part 1. But we got a couple commenters that came in that were kind of throwing stuff out there about, well, I don't believe in this, or I don't agree with nitriding. And here's the deal. If you want to make a contradictory statement, that's cool, show your work. And when I asked people, they said, okay, I don't believe in this, period. Okay, fine. That's fine. I understand you don't believe it. Why? And when the answer is, because I scratched it at home. Well, okay, wait a minute. No, I need more data than that. Or I didn't see it with my gun, or it's just snake oil. If you can't show your work and can't back up your work, you're not making a salient claim. So what I did is I went out and contacted 2 other barrel manufacturers because I don't want to talk to only Faxon for our viewers. That makes sense. One I don't want to mention because they didn't tell me I could. But the other one is Krieger. And Krieger wrote back to me just in an email, and they said that they absolutely have seen and agree with the benefits of nitriding, and they do think it's a good idea. The problem they have with it, and the problem the other guy I talked to had with it, is they're not the ones doing the nitriding process. They make the barrel, then they send it to someone to get nitrided, and nitriding is a process. It's a chemical process. And if you heat it too high or for too long, you can actually cause stress on the barrel or cause problems with the nitriding process. One of them called it scaling, in fact. You can actually see changes in the density or the thickness of the barrel. You can actually see it grow or shrink. And so they like it and agree that it's a good thing, but they didn't want to warranty a product that they didn't have control over from A to Z, and therefore nitriding to them was a complication in terms of not having the ability to trust the person doing the process. The other guy I talked to, who I don't want to mention because I didn't want to get his authority to say it, was that he was a little more dubious. He wasn't sure. He said he's seen benefits and seen things that haven't worked out well. And so, for example, he said if you had a barrel that was poorly cut and had a rough chamber, and then you nitride it, you've essentially hardened that roughness, and it takes time to wear that out. So I know that's a lot of words, but can you address that? It sounds to me like they agreed, but they had some caveats.
Right. And that's absolutely the case, like we talked about with chrome. If it's done wrong, it can ruin a barrel. And we start talking about, hopefully here another part, the actual construction of a barrel and where things can go wrong in the manufacturing process, et cetera. But nitride is absolutely a spot that something can absolutely go wrong. Now, it does not do it in the same way that chrome barrels are fantastic today. The guys who are doing nitride have been doing it a long time, and they, generally speaking, really know what they're doing. But to nitride as a process, it's anywhere from 1,000 to 1,100 degrees, depending on the specific process. And for a lot of steels, that's right at bordering, potentially just above or right below the temperature where you are going to heat treat that piece of steel. So you're going to change the material hardness of the base material that's underneath the nitride or that's being treated by the nitride. So what they're speaking to is you've got to do it right. You've got to make sure that it's in the bath the appropriate amount of time to imbue the nitrogen and go through the chemical process, but not also so long that it's going to start affecting the base piece of steel in a significant way. In that case, deforming the bore. In that case, potentially softening it too much, and you can have catastrophic issues, etc. So
in summary, both of them agreed there was a benefit. Krieger absolutely said there was a benefit. They were just concerned when a third party does the process. And what it boils down to is just like any other manufacturing process, it's a precision job. And if you don't do it precisely, you can induce problems. But if you do it correctly, they agreed that it had benefit.
Yep, and that's definitely the case. And like any other process, the key is how do you measure the results of the process after you're done? When you physically cut a piece of steel, it's hard gauges, it's headspace gauges, it's micrometers. You can test that. And you can likewise do the same thing with nitride, which is what Faxon does and what I'm hoping every other person out there does when they get nitride back in, is they're testing the barrel to ensure that there wasn't anything that went wrong during that process.
So that's part of Faxon's QC process. You don't do the nitride, but you have someone you work with that you trust. And then when you get the product back, you do your own QC on it to make sure that a Faxon nitrided barrel hasn't been accidentally subjected to 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 1,100 or whatever, right?
That's exactly it. Same way, why do you do MPI inspection on a piece of barrel steel when the steel mill is told you with a certificate saying, I absolutely did this correctly? Well, I'm verifying. I'm going to make sure because it's my name on the line and that shooter's safety for that pressure vessel that's going inches from their face.
Oh, absolutely. We guarantee your antivirus software works, right? Same exact argument. Fair enough. Okay, Nathan, I've spent another 30 plus minutes of your time, and these have been excellent questions and answers, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your workday to do this with us. So I think we're going to have a part 3. We got a lot to talk about here. Guys, I hope you appreciate this, and also thank Nathan for taking his time out at Faxon to do this with us, because it's really valuable information for everyone. So if you like this kind of stuff, please consider supporting us on Patreon. If you need a barrel, well, Faxon appears to be the guy to go to. They've got some really cool stuff going on. If you do like it, please subscribe to both our channels on Full 30 and YouTube and on Facebook, and share the video with your friends. Thanks a lot.